Well, hello. I'm delighted to give this talk for Coin Genius. And I think the topic is a good one, blockchain, the road to mass adoption. What is the road? Well, if you talk to people who ought to know, they'll tell you there isn't much of a road at all. Gartner says blockchain will be nothing more than an add-on for ERP and CRM software. And after the crash of crypto, a lot of people were wringing their hands and thinking maybe this whole Gartner thing and maybe this whole blockchain thing is just not going to happen. Now, I'm old enough. There's good news and bad news to that, mainly bad. But the good is I've seen it before a lot, looking at new technologies and what happens when you get a big new innovation and what's the cycle that they go through. And I remember during the right after the crash of the dot-coms, a similar thing happened to the 2018 crypto crash, which is that a lot of people said this is not really a big deal and that the internet is really not going to happen. At that time, I was getting $150,000 for a 20-minute speech. And that particular audience was around the world of 75,000 people. And there were lots of stuff like that. 2 years later, I did 100 speeches that year. 2 years later, nobody wanted to hear from me. Now, eventually they did again, but this always happens when you get a big new innovation. And, new paradigms cause dislocation, confusion, and they're nearly always received with coolness or worse, mockery. Now, Jamie Dimon has subsequently changed his point of view, but there have been lots of big innovations over time where they started off with this problem of legacy attitudes. I'm old enough to remember when Ken Olsen said that there's no reason for an individual to have a computer in his home. Digital Equipment Corporation was almost bigger than IBM at the time as the biggest computer company in the world. And that will go down in the category of famous last words. So what's really happening? Well, what I'd like to do in the next half an hour or so is talk to you about the promise of this technology, then the reality, and to speak with you frankly about the challenges. How do we get mass adoption of this technology? To begin, the promise. Again, a little personal history. I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. And I finally wrote my first bestsellers in the early 90s, Paradigm Shift in 93. And it was obviously a big book. And then The Digital Economy, that they say was the first bestseller about the web, at least the web in business. And I was required to reflect on my attitudes 20 years later when I was asked to write the 20th anniversary edition of The Digital Economy. And I had to think about what has occurred. And I decided that we've been through this first era of the digital age, mainframes, mini computers, PCs, the internet, the web, social media, the mobile web, the cloud, big data. And now we're entering a second era where technology infuses itself into everything, into the physical world, with billions and trillions of inert objects becoming smart communicating devices and even doing transactions. We have technology that learns to do things that it wasn't programmed to do, and so on. And I've surprised myself by coming to the conclusion that the underlying technology for the second era was in fact blockchain. And the way that we think of it at the Blockchain Research Institute is that this is the second era of the internet blockchain. That's what it represents. So just explaining the promise and giving you a conceptual framework so we can test on what's happening. For 40 years, we've had an internet of information. The late 70s, I was at Bell Northern Research, Canada's Bell Labs, and we had this vast network of networks using multifunction workstations, the ARPANET, and this is the internet of information. But when I send you some information, PDF, an email, a photo, whatever, I'm actually not sending you the information. I'm sending you a copy. Even with websites, I retain the original, and that works great for information. But when it comes to assets, like, say, money, or financial assets like stocks and bonds, or loyalty points, or intellectual property, or a music recording, or the data in our identities, or even votes and assets, something of value that belongs to somebody. Copying those is a bad idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? So cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for a long time. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through intermediaries: banks, governments, credit card companies, stock exchanges, transfer agents, brokers, custodians, even now big social media companies, and they perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the party, they identify the asset, they clear and settle transactions, and they keep records. Overall, they've done a pretty good job, but as most of you listening know, there have been growing problems. They exclude a couple of billion people from the global economy. They're all centralized, and there are two types of these central institutions and systems: those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. And we're left picking up the pieces, the creators of this data. They cost too much. Why is it 10 to 20% to send money from a housekeeper in Toronto to her mom in Manila? And why does it take 4 to 7 days? And when heard of cross-border email payments or 7-day delivery on email? And the biggest problem is that we create this data, but they capture it. And that's a big problem in a lot of ways that I'll describe. So what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast, global, distributed ledger where anything of value, from money to securities to intellectual property to votes, could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. What if there were a native digital medium for value? Well, enter blockchain. That's Satoshi's big innovation. He cracked the double spend problem. And this is far beyond Bitcoin, because now, for the first time ever, people can interact, transact, manage value peer-to-peer, and they can trust each other. And trust is not achieved by a middleman. It's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code, which is why we call it the trust protocol. It's a native digital medium for trust. So I had a great analogy about why a blockchain was really hard to hack, but John Oliver on late night television had some fun with it. So I'm just going to play that analogy for you right now. You'll see why I don't use it anymore. Here's Oliver. Did a whole show on blockchain.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
My body is whole, but what of my soul? See, you can see why I don't use the analogy, although I still think it's a good one. So I got lucky on the timing of this book. I also got lucky on my co-author. And Blockchain Revolution is the big bestseller now. If you're in North America and you're picking up a copy, get this one here that has a yellow band across the top because it's the new version of the book. In other countries, it's in 19 languages now. This yellow version is the English version outside of North America. So the promise that we described in the book is that this new internet of value can radically reshape every institution in society. It can move us to a more distributed and decentralized world where people have real power. It can be used to solve all kinds of intractable social problems, from land titles and remittances to fighting climate change. It will lead to profound changes in the deep structure and architecture of a corporation. It will transform every industry. What's the reality? Well, the way that I would describe it is it's uneven and combined development. Uneven. Some areas are moving more slowly, and there are reasons for that. Other areas are moving more quickly. But we're in the early stages of a mass adoption. In some industries, we're about to see massive transformations. And in some, they're already underway. So these are 10 of, I don't know, 50 topics that I could discuss today. I'm going to just spend a minute, if I can, on each of them, just to talk to you about actual operational implementations that are making a real difference. First is supply chains. This is a $50 trillion industry. And if you got it, it came from a supply chain. And we've got big, powerful implementations that are occurring. Everledger, along with the Kimberley process, has basically solved the problem of conflict diamonds that used to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Now you can know the provenance of a diamond and that it came from an ethical source. IBM has partnered with Walmart and Golden State Foods and Kroger and all kinds of other big organizations to implement the food trust. It used to take Walmart 3 weeks to find out where a bad avocado came from. Now they can do it in 20 seconds. And that's really important. Eventually, you'll be able to scan that pork chop and know everything about it, what animal it came from, what it ate, what medication it had, what its parents were, how it moved through the food chain, what its, what temperature it was stored at. If you have fish tonight, or had fish, 25% of the time it's incorrectly labeled. It's a cheap fish labeled as a good fish, or an endangered species labeled as an okay species. We can now solve that problem, and there are great implementations on Hyperledger to do that. Volvo is the first car maker to implement a global traceability system of the cobalt using its batteries, using blockchain. And the current pandemic, of course, is evidence of the kind of problems that exist. I mean, how can it be that we have trouble getting a paper mask to frontline workers? Hoarding comes about through fear and lack of transparency in the supply chain. If you know that the supply chain is capable of producing toilet paper and a shortage would last a day, you're not going to go and buy 3 years of toilet paper. And how do we know about the provenance of medical equipment and ventilators? So there are all kinds of really big opportunities to move towards a new, open, transparent supply chain. You've got trains and boats and planes and trucks and all kinds of sub-manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies and agents and tax authorities and escrow agents and so on, all moving around with ERP and EDI and traditional systems and paper and faxes. And imagine if all of that were a shared network state, where you have a single version of the truth and all kinds of, the metabolism is picked up. You can have micro payments, you can have smart payments through smart contracts and so on. So heard it here first, almost first. We've released a book called The Supply Chain Revolution. It's the best of some of the BRI work on this. And I've edited this book and written a forward for it. It's shipping in a week on Amazon in the US. So I hope you can pick it up. Next topic is health. Now, any one of these is a whole separate conversation, but I think healthcare may end up being the killer app, and some of the early implementations are very exciting. When the pandemic hit, we launched a series of projects on blockchain and pandemics. Of course, supply chains, but also looking at health data as well as a huge opportunity. How about skills and talent? Knowing that someone is in fact an accredited person to work in this facility or moving across a border. The ability to have contract tracing so that the person being tracked can agree to that for a period of time, but then can get it back. You can't do that with centralized systems, but you could with a blockchain. And rather than governments decreeing things, we could be building in incentives for change that could be very powerful. And of course, to move towards a new recovery, we're going to need lots of changes there as well. And well, I'll talk about that in a sec. So there are real operational systems underway now. Anthem is working with Aetna, Healthcare Services Corporation, IBM, NC Bank, and a new partnership to use blockchain to help patients securely access and share their medical data. Similar thing is happening at the University Health Network, where they have a blockchain platform that gives patients the control over their data to give permission to researchers to use that data. Media Ledger is a blockchain platform that provides track and trace for the pharmaceutical supply chain. And Remedy Chain is currently using this data to have a chain of custody where Media Ledger or Medi Ledger leads off. Tracking what happens to drugs once they've reached the hand of the patient. And a lot of these drugs are never used. Billions of dollars of them are thrown away and they could be reused. The Internet of Things, trillions of inert objects communicating. WiseKeys put billions of chips into devices, and it's essentially a blockchain company. Golden State Foods, that provides food for McDonald's, is moving to a blockchain platform. And Bob Woolpart, CIO there, is a great leader and a great believer in blockchain, thinks it's transformative for the industry. I didn't start with this one because most people think this is what it's all about. And for sure, the traditional financial industry is in for big change. The industry is kind of like a Rube Goldberg machine, a super complicated thing that does something really simple, like crack an egg or open a door. But when all is said and done, it does some very simple things. It identifies a party or a value that you are who you are, that's a stock. It stores values to be in safes, now computer systems. It moves value around, money, securities, whatever. Because it moves value, it gets to lend value. It gets to fund and invest value. So venture capital, private equity, mutual funds, hedge funds, all the rest. Exchanges value, all kinds of markets, transactions, stock markets. It insures value, it manages risks, insurance companies, reinsurance companies. It analyzes value, and there's a big industry analyzing financial data, and accounts for value, the big auditing companies, accounting companies, and so on. Now, in Blockchain Revolution, we talk about how every one of these can be completely disrupted. And that's starting to happen in some areas, and other areas it's slow to move. So Bankit's a digital asset platform created by Intercontinental Exchange that enables consumers and institutions to buy, sell, and store and spend digital assets on a global network. Visa B2B Connect, big implementation from the world's biggest credit card company. R3 has implemented a series of operational systems, and they're going after SWIFT, the big central agency that handles all the global clearinghouse. And some of these big changes are described in another book, and I'm giving you these as a great resource. This is edited with a gorgeous main chapter. It's a third of the book by Alex Tapscott. And I know the first time I read that, even me, and I'm deep into this, the top of my head kind of blew off. It's a very profound analysis of how this industry is changing with details about all the big developments that are happening. Now, this is one where it's moved more slowly. We thought blockchain would be transformative for music. Imogen Heap, when we wrote the book, was already posting a song on a blockchain platform. The song's inside a smart contract. And you want to listen to the song says, sure, it's free, or a few microcents. You want to put the song in your movie, and the song says, well, what are you going to do with it? Background music, theme song, somebody's going to sing it, whatever. And she says the song acts as a business. It's protecting my IP rights. Now, it turns out that that vision is a good one, but it's taking a long time. And a big problem is the labels are fighting against this. Leaders of old paradigms, invested interests. The good news on that is that 90% of all industry created in the world will be created in the next 10 years. So there's an opportunity to move forward. Same thing with land titles. 70% of land titles in the developing world are not enforceable. And you're in Honduras, a dictator comes to power and says, you may have a piece of paper says you own your farm, but the government computer says my friend owns your farm. And this is a huge problem in India. I'm doing a talk to an audience of like 10,000 people in India on Saturday morning. And 80% of land titles in India have this problem. Now, blockchain, of course, is a fabulous platform for land titles because you put it up there and nobody can mess with it. It's unless you know how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. But it's also a public platform. And so the governments, the media, the press, the international agencies, civil society can all see that. So you can't be a corrupt clerk in India and bribe somebody or take a bribe to give away somebody's land title. Now, the problem with that one turned out to be that, well, it's really difficult to get a valid land title in the first place. So there's a lot of work to be done there. This is one that's moved more quickly than we thought. Reliance Geo is implementing a blockchain as a service to 300 million of its customers. And we've done some really good work, and this is now publicly available on the Blockchain Research Institute website, about how mesh networks and blockchain could be a facilitator of 5G and maybe even a substitute for 5G. One of the most exciting areas is having to do with energy and climate and so on. The oil industry, I was talking to a CIO of one of the big oil companies recently, and he said, we are now convinced that blockchain is ready for prime time in upstream oil and gas, and that's where all the action is. CarbonX.ca, a company that I co-founded, full disclosure, tokenizing carbon credits and about to release some carbon neutral mutual funds and a hedge fund. An ETF is the first one out. And there are a number of other really great implementations. LO3 Energy is dealing with the challenge of data in a distributed environment and uses blockchain to be able to collect data. So your electronic, your light will buy power from a distributed power source, maybe go on to an auction, find the best source of power for the next hour. And when it pays for the power, because it'll do transactions, its reputation as a trustworthy device is established because it makes payments and it'll do micropayments and smart payments and so on. So this is going to generate so much data that can be enormously useful to homeowners and to people who use power, and also to the providers of power. In Blockchain Revolution, 4 years ago, we talked about MOOC. It's happening, operational system. Road to mass adoption, they adopted 4 years ago. And they're an aircraft precision part manufacturer based in New York. They're in a highly regulated industry segment. Among its customers are the Department of Defense, Airbus, Lockheed Martin, Boeing. They used to manufacture and ship stuff out to these people, and now they're increasingly 3D printing the part at the Boeing factory, and they use blockchain to handle all the transactions. This to me is one of the biggest, and there's so many exciting things going on right now. It has to do with data, the new asset class of the digital age. You create that data, but the virtual you, well, first of all, it may know more about you than you do, because you can't remember what you spent a year ago, or where you were, your exact location, or what medication you had, what diagnosis you took, what you got in a test, hundreds of classes of data. You create it, but it's kind of like feudalism. Back then, the serf would grow produce, the landlord would take away most of it, and they'd be left with a little bit. Well, you create this data, and the digital landlords take it away, and you're left with a few digital cabbages. And that's a big problem, but it's a problem for reasons that people don't really understand. 5 of them. First, you create the data, but you can't use it to plan your own life. Imagine how amazing that would be to have that data. You can't monetize it. Top 5 digital conglomerates in the world are the top 5 companies in the S&P index, and they're 20% of the entire S&P. They're getting the wealth from your data. Thirdly, it's not secure, and it's going to be hacked, and you're going to be left picking up the pieces if it's not already happened. Fourth, all these data are in silos, so we can't aggregate this data in, say, a pandemic to have proper epidemiological information. This pandemic could have been stopped in its tracks if we had access to data. And think about, a personal health record that's generating real-time data about your heart rate, maybe your temperature, and whether or not you're coughing, and so on. If we could aggregate that, even anonymously, you'd get permission to do that. And the final one is that, yes, our privacy is being undermined. And people say to me, Don, privacy's dead, get over it. If you got nothing to hide, what's your problem? This is stupidity. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. And we need to get our data back, because this data represents our identities. If we can get it back, we can manage our own identities responsibly for our own lives and our own benefit. Blockchain can enable us to do that. Imagine self-sovereign identity. You own it. You create the data. You keep every cabbage you grow, and all your carrots and chickens and all the rest. And it moves around with you in a black box. It's sweeping up this trail of transactions as you go along. And you manage it for your own benefit. This is not a pipe dream. We're doing a ton of research in this area, and there's a ton of activity that's underway. These are just some of the big ones: Secure Key, Uport, and so on. And I'm running out of time here. I want to get to the point. The final one that's a big interest to us is government. The internet was supposed to enable the reinvention of government. I don't think it really did that. We paved the cow path. But now we have an internet of value that deals with assets, which are what government's all about. We have an opportunity to reinvent central banks through things like fiat-based cryptocurrencies. There are multiple types of these. There are the community currencies like Bitcoin. There are the corporate currencies like Libra, and now the central bank digital currencies. And a big one is the DCP being launched by China. There's a lot of hand-wringing going on around the world. If China can do this, they'll roll out their new currency across China into Southeast Asia along One Belt, One Road, linking Hong Kong to Rotterdam into Africa, replace the US dollar as the currency of record. So brilliant leaders like Chris Giancarlo, former head of the CFTC, the Commodity Future Trading Exchange, is leading the digital dollar project as a way of moving forward on that. But the Fed is still unclear as to what to do. Mark Carney, former head of the Bank of England, says no country's currency should be the currency of record. We need a new global currency like Keynes was proposing at Bretton Woods in 1944. He calls it a global synthetic hegemonic digital currency. This is a really big deal. I can't think of anything that would have a bigger impact on the economy and could be a bigger opportunity or a bigger threat to privacy if we do it wrong. And then, do I have to convince anybody we have a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions? You know, a lot of young people aren't voting. Congress, government for the people, by the people, of the people. 94% of Americans want background checks for firearms. We can't pass a law that says that. Why? Because politicians are not accountable to the voters. They're accountable to the people who put them there, the big funders. Now we have the rise of populism and xenophobia and, or worse, all kinds of huge problems all around the world. So blockchain's not going to fix this. People fix problems, not technology. But we have a new technology that could help us. We could have digital voting. I don't think you're going to trust a vote online unless you have cryptographic proof that the double spend problem has been solved, and that your vote is cast for the person for whom you're voting, and it can't be moved around. But blockchain could help us in other ways. We could have smart votes to help bring about accountability. We could have smart money inside a smart contract. Send your kid to university, give him some money, hope he spends it on books and tuition and not in the bar. Well, he walks into the bar, orders a caipirinha, and the money says, sorry, Bobby, I don't do caipirinhas, you know, I only do books and tuition. So why couldn't we have smart votes where your vote is inside a smart contract that specifies not only who you're voting for, but what their program is. And if they don't implement their program, there are consequences. So powerful initiatives underway in all of these areas, and I could have talked about a lot more. Uneven but combined development. But this is not yet a mass thing. You know, what is the road to mass adoption? Well, let's talk frankly about some of the challenges. And I'm going to talk about four ones. The scope of the change, the challenge of scalability, interoperability, our image problem, and the challenge of governance. First of all, you know, with the Internet of Information, you put up a website, do it in 24 hours, you're in business. You want to do transactions today, you get Spotify, you're up in a week with a sweet site. Blockchain, afraid not. This is, you got a $50 trillion supply chain industry. You can't just implement a system. The CEO of FedEx said, I was Fred Smith interviewing him at Consensus, big audience, thousands of people. And he said, you know, back in the old days, we'd come up with a new system, put our logo on it. We invented the chain of custody. We implemented it, and we changed the whole market. And the industry says you can't do that today. With blockchain, we're going to rebuild the logistics industry, but we need the whole industry to participate. Another big change is that this is leading to profound changes in the corporation. I don't have time to go into this. You can read about it in the book, but where we talk about Ronald Coase, who had a theory of the firm. The reason that we have firms at all is because transactions at an open market are greater than the costs of doing things inside the boundaries of the corporation. Blockchain is beginning to demolish those transaction costs. throughout the 20th century, we had the vertically integrated corporation, did everything from soup to nuts. In 93, paradigm shift, I said, I think IT is networks are making the boundaries of the corporation more porous. I called it an extended enterprise. Um, uh, 2000, we called it business ecosystems, the business web. That's a 20-year-old diagram of the Cisco business web as companies focused more on what they did best and they partnered to do the rest. What does it mean to have an internet of value? I think we're moving to a new model of distributed value corporation and a profound value creation and a profound change in the deep structure and architecture of the corporation, how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, create goods and services, engage with the world, and so on. You know what? This is going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. And that's one reason that things appear to be moving slowly. We speak frankly. We should speak frankly. We have a number of silos. The first 10 years of blockchain have created a suite of separate chains, some private, some public, and so on. Now, how are these going to come together? Well, think about the Internet of Information. You know, in the mid-90s, everybody was saying, well, this Internet itself is the Wild West. You know, it's got porn and all the hackers and all kinds of stuff on it. We'll build our own proprietary intranets. Well, a similar thing is happening with blockchain, but over time, these things are going to open up. Now, that doesn't mean we won't have permission networks. There's absolutely a role for those. Sometimes you only want people with permission, like say a customer, to use your network. But there are a number of things that are causing all this to come together. So in August of last year, Hypernet introduced Besu, a Java-based Ethereum client, the first blockchain project submitted to Hyperledger that can operate on a public blockchain. And Besu represents a growing interest in enterprises to build both permission and public network cases for their applications. Cosmos, you know, around here we kind of think that's an extraordinary technology. The Internet of Blockchains. And if they can pull that off, it not only solves the interoperability problem, but if you have blockchains working together, that helps solve the scalability problem as well. About a little over a month ago, the ISO, the International Standards Organization, held a big global conference on blockchain. I was the opening speaker at it. There were like 500 people. And for that, we shared our model of standardization. And, you know, it took a year to create this diagram. But basically, you have standards are required in every industry. We have electrical standards that enable your light to come on. And it used to be a train in the US would come along and it would stop and everyone would get off the train and all carry all their baggage and they go to a new train on a different track with a different gauge. Well, we don't do that anymore. Standards kind of make everyone want to have a nap, but actually they're fundamental to the progress and mass adoption in any technology. You got standards at each platform. That's underway. Ethereum's got its standards, Bitcoin, Cosmos, and so on. But then we have cross-platform and interoperability standards like Besu. We have standards for digital assets, token standards. So the EEA, Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, launched its token taxonomy initiative. And that initiative is working on building standards, and the leaders of that left the EEA. They now created a whole new inter-network alliance. You need application level standards. FedEx is going to change the logistics industry. What's a bill of lading? So one of the blockchain guys at FedEx is now the chairman of BITA, the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance. We need standards at the level of digital payments. We need standards at the level of business models, and we do a lot of that at the BRI. And we need good standards for public policy. This is a big deal. Blockchain has an image problem. I don't need to convince you of this. And there's still lots of scammers and hypers and everything else in this industry. You know, they're criminals. Criminals are always the first to adopt exciting new technologies, so we should cut ourselves some slack. But, you know, probably 1% of Bitcoin is used by criminals. On the other hand, 3% of cash is probably used by criminals, according to Alex Tapscott. So, and law enforcement actually likes Bitcoin, the smart ones, because that's a good way to catch the bad guys. Cash is the foundation of all kinds of illegal activity. But with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies like that, the players are anonymous, but there's a record of the transaction. You can use metadata. The final challenge is one of governance. And, by that, I don't mean government. I mean self-organizing, bottom-up stewardship of this resource. And we spent a lot of time talking about this. We actually have been doing these blockchain census in companies around the world. And the biggest problem that people say in countries around the world, and the biggest problem people say is that regulatory environments making it very difficult for us. Regulators lack knowledge. They've got this whole mental model that this is criminal or bad activity. There's lack of clarity. You know, the tax authorities are going to say your token offering is revenue and should be taxed. And the securities people are going to say it's a security and you have to do a full perspective and so on. And a lot of these, sandboxes and so on have ended up being quicksand. They just haven't improved the situation. So we need to think about governance. And we spent a lot of time on this. You know, the internet's not governed by a government. It's governed by a series of self-organizing networks. Standards group like the IEEE, knowledge networks like the Internet Society, delivery networks like ICANN, they just deliver domain names, policy networks like the Internet Governance Forum, and so on. And we need the similar types of networks to mature in the blockchain world. 2016, we brought together a bunch of the leaders from the various industries, Bitcoin, Joe Lubin, one of the founders of Ethereum. We had Brian Bellendorf from Hyperledger, Perianne Boring, who was the founder of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. And we adopted something called the Muskoka group principles to move forward. And there has been lots of good progress since then. We ended up writing a report for the World Economic Forum, sharing these insights on how we can go about stewarding this resource. So to close, the road to mass adoption, we're on it. It's happening, but all these things need to be done. And at the Blockchain Research Institute, we're doing our bit to try and bridge the potential to actual mass deployment. We've had 80 companies and they pay $150K or $200K to join the BRI. But when they do, they get millions of dollars of IP and services, and I'd welcome an inquiry from anybody. Today, we have on these courses, we spent $1 million developing them through Coursera and INSEAD. They're the top blockchain courses on blockchain in the enterprise, available anywhere in the world. And if you go to coursera.org, promo blockchain revolution, take a picture of the screen, you can get 25% off. And this offer will last through the weekend. So please take advantage of these courses. Got 250 videos, 250 quizzes. They're awesome. It's a big promise. Second era of the digital age. Reality is uneven and combined, and there are some big challenges that we need to dig down and get working on. This is a new paradigm, and when you get one of these, you get a leadership crisis, as I said. How are we going to make this happen? Well, leadership is your personal opportunity if you will it. And leadership comes from everywhere. Can we do this? To me, the future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved. And we can achieve a new future if we will it. Let me close with an analogy, and I'm a little over my time here, but we've been studying nature to learn about decentralized systems. And fish come in schools, birds come in swarms, bees come in swarms. Starlings over the moors of England and other places come in something called a murmuration. It's a word in the dictionary. It refers to the murmuring of the wings of the bird. And they're out over a 20-mile radius throughout the day doing their starling thing. And at night, they create one of the most spectacular things in all of nature. The murmuration has a function. It protects the birds, and it warms them up for the night ahead. You can see in some of these videos, like here on the right, that's a predator, a hawk, 25 times the size of a starling being chased away by the collective power of the little birds. Scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. There's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, this magic happens. So is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we learn something from it? This murmuration functions according to the principles of the trust protocol. It's a giant collaboration. Remember I said trust is not achieved through a middleman, it's achieved through collaboration and through cryptography and clever code. There's code in the DNA of the birds that gives them rules. Big ones like don't get too far away. But another one is don't bump into each other. And the murmuration also has a great interdependence. When I speak to CEO audiences, I say, business can't succeed in a world that's failing. And this murmuration functions as if the interests of an individual bird are connected to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. And overall, it has a great integrity, which to me is the foundation of trust. Because what is trust? Trust is really the expectation that the other party will act with integrity, that they will do the right thing. Which is why a little bird will chase after a predator 25 times its size, because it knows that the other birds will have its back, that they will do the right thing. Now, this is not cognition here. This is a stimulus response in nature, but humans have cognition. And imagine if we could connect ourselves on this planet with a set of networks of glass and air and cryptography and code, where we bring our human cognition to bear in new ways. What could we do with that? What kind of intractable problems could we solve? I get a lot of hope when I look at this murmuration that maybe this smaller, more decentralized world that our kids inherit might actually be a better place. And that this age of distributed intelligence might be an age where the promise of digital is finally fulfilled and the peril is unrequited. Thank you so much, and do follow up with us at the Blockchain Research Institute, and I'd be delighted to collaborate with any of you. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the event.